Welcome to the Confidence Through Health podcast. My name is Jerry Snyder. As a health, wellness, and sports performance coach, my goal each week is to bring you experts to help you take control of your health and build your self-confidence. Thanks for including me today on your journey to better health. I'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, All In Health and Wellness. If you're looking for a health coach, you're looking for a sports performance coach, you're looking for nutrition guidance, like for instance, a meal-by-meal plan that will help you understand how to eat. It will teach you how to eat, and it will give your body, your cells, the proper nutrition to feel great and be able to perform at your best, not just physically, but also emotionally and mentally. If you're looking for those things, you're looking for the key to improve your sports performance, both from a nutrition standpoint and an exercise physical standpoint and a mental standpoint as you approach your athletic event. All In Health and Wellness is able to help in these areas. Go to allinhealthandwellness.com and you'll find the contact information for how to get in touch with them and get started on the plan that will improve your life. Well, thank you, Dr. Lewis, for being a guest on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
Thank you, Jerry, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to our conversation today.
So one of the things that interests me is, I mean, obviously the people that follow me and that listen, they know I'm talking about nutrition and I'm talking about things that are going to make us healthy from the inside out. And, you know, to do that, we look at the cellular level and what's happening at the cellular level. You've done some fascinating research and found some things that are happening in what nutrition can play a part in both seeing the negative side, but also how it can correct issues. Before we get into all that, what drove you to like, okay, this is where I want to be. This is what my calling is for helping people with nutrition and health overall.
Well, Jerry, I have a very long road, which I guess most of us do once we hit middle age or older. And my road started out very early in life when my grandfather was pitching baseball to me out in the backyard when I was probably 3 or 4 years old. And then I played sports through college or through high school. And then in college, I got into drug-free competitive bodybuilding, and I became fascinated with, getting bigger. I was always a really skinny kid. And so I started lifting weights to build up my body, and my body, I have a body type that responds really well to weight training and strength training. And so as a bodybuilder, obviously you have to be pretty regimented and dedicated, just like you as an endurance athlete. I mean, regardless of the activity we're choosing to pursue, if you want to do anything on any serious level, you have to be pretty regimented and pretty structured about it.
Yeah.
And bodybuilding is certainly that. I mean, you can make fun of those guys for using drugs and doing what all they do. That's absolutely ridiculous. But if one thing you can give those guys credit for, it's working hard. I mean, you can't just take a drug and expect to look great. You've got, or a regimen of drugs. You've still got to train very hard. But I was not, that's where I drew the line. I just was not willing to go down the drug route. I just didn't think it was worth it for me, either for my health in the future or that I didn't have any delusions of making a living as a bodybuilder. But what it did do was that it structured in my mind the idea of how you use nutrition and exercise to achieve something, basically. But after that, for a few years, I mean, that wasn't a very big portion of my life. That only lasted a few years. And I shifted more into a focus from sports and physical performance to really health. And I thought that was where, ultimately I could help make a difference in many more people's lives, was getting into more of the health side of nutrition and exercise. And I still at that point didn't really know exactly that I was going to pursue a career in research. Up till that point, I was just I referred to myself as sort of like a chameleon, like depending on the people I was around at whatever stage or point in my life, I sort of adapted to whatever other people were doing. And I had, sort of an evolving list or a number of interests and pursuits and whatnot. But when I did ultimately decide to get into academic research, I still was bringing, all that personal experience in bodybuilding and just my own interest in nutrition and exercise to the table to do research. And so I began carving out a little niche for myself. At the University of Miami, there's no department or center or school of nutrition. And it doesn't have it there. It's a small private institution. So,
Right.
it's not like a large school like Texas A&M that's got,
Right.
lots of different departments and majors and centers and whatnot. But I did, over the course of that period, manage to carve out a niche for myself where I was one of a handful of people doing nutrition research at that time. And where it really took me to a new level was meeting Dr. Reg McDaniel, a gentleman in the Dallas area, a pathologist by training, who about 40 years ago started practicing nutrition due to his interest and what he discovered in the polysaccharides from aloe vera. And around the same time, I met this lady, a cancer patient at the University of Miami, who was having her own polysaccharide experience, but these were polysaccharides coming from rice bran, not aloe vera.
Right.
And interestingly, you can look at your life and how things happen and why they happen and, sort of do the what ifs and whys and all that. But both of those people came into my life roughly the same time, about 20 years ago. Neither one knew each other. Barbara here in Fort Lauderdale, Dr. McDaniel out in the Dallas area. But yet they completely introduced me to things in their lives that had changed their lives very profoundly in similar yet different ways. And what I had learned about polysaccharides as a student was probably one or two biochemistry lectures, talking about saccharides basically being a fuel source for the cells. But beyond that, really no clue. I had no idea what these two people were talking about when they came into my life. And so they didn't just change my career, they actually changed my life, because now here I am about 20 years later having this conversation with you and sharing this message that I have of all this research we've conducted with these polysaccharides in people with Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, HIV, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's a pretty long list at this point. But Jerry, it's just been an incredible ride, especially these last 20 years where, I didn't really make it a point to say, well, I'm going to study aloe vera or rice bran because I think these are incredible nutrients. It was because I met two people who, at that moment, I was willing to hear their story and have them tell me what they had experienced and all the ifs, ands, or whys. And so it was just an opportunity, really. I mean, I guess you could say I was in the right place at the right time to meet these two individuals who, again, completely changed my life and my career. And so I'm forever indebted to them because of what they shared with me and how that influenced my interests and ultimately where I am today to talk about not just nutrition generally, but actually these polysaccharides from aloe vera and rice bran that I would put up basically against anything else that Mother Nature provides for us to have any sort of health promoting benefit. I mean, my goodness, the effects that just our lab, I mean, forget other labs from around the world of other scientists looking at these two plants and why they're so beneficial for human health. But I mean, my goodness, just what we've published alone is, without sounding too arrogant or egotistical about it, is pretty profound, actually, when you consider, what we've showed so far. So that's where I am today. And I'm no longer in academics. I left academics 7 years ago to go into the dietary supplement world, but the message is basically still the same. It's just that I'm now, in business as opposed to being in academics. But yeah, that's a bit of a nutshell of why I got into all this.
Well, and so, like, a little tidbit, just side note, connection to my grandfather, who was born in the 20s, the Depression era, but when I was researching about you, I was like, oh, I've got to mention this. They're like, he, for years and years and years, he always had an aloe vera plant and used it for so many different things from a health benefit standpoint of help healing the body, putting on cuts, putting on like using it for different things. And as you said, like that Mother Nature provides these things for us. Like these things are out there, and there's a piece of it that we've just overlooked because whether it's just, our civilization has just grown so fast, so quickly, that we've been able to produce all these other things, and we go after the dopamine hit versus what's really helping and healing the body. And we skip over all these things that are out there that are that are healing us from the inside, and not just healing us, getting us stronger, but also preventing the diseases that are taking us down pretty quickly right now.
That's exactly right. And to your point about aloe vera, I mean, whether it's the Bible or other old texts of human history, you can see in these texts that humans have been using aloe vera for thousands of years. They didn't know why scientifically back then, but clearly this plant, just like rice, has incredible healing property to it. And
Mhm.
even today, when I'm giving or I'm doing this sort of interview with people, anytime I'd say 75, 80% of people who hears about aloe vera, the first thing they think of is for a sunburn, right? Like you think
Oh
of it
yeah. Mhm.
for a topical solution, a
Right.
sunburn, cut a wound or something. And
Yep.
that's fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but the gel is 99% water. And so you have very little polysaccharide content in all of that water. But when you can concentrate it into a powder like we do with our stuff, and then give the body orally this amazing polysaccharide, it's just like dynamite. I mean, it's
Yeah.
literally like giving the cells the nutrients that the genes interpret that information. I mean, these
Mhm.
polysaccharides are coated with so much information, more than amino acids, more than fatty acids, certainly more than vitamins and minerals. And literally every cell in the body utilizes these polysaccharides when they're conducting their bioengineering of life
Mhm.
processes.
Mhm.
And so it's just incredible what happens when you give the body these polysaccharides orally. I mean, again, keep using your aloe vera gel for a sunburn or a cut or a
Right.
wound. That's fine,
Right.
but it's really a very limited way of getting the most benefit from this plant.
Yeah. And so talking about that difference in nutrients, right? And at a high level, I think this is something that most people are always searching for, right? They want the magic pill that's going to be able to
Right.
do whatever. And at the high level, it's a lot of times we're missing the micronutrient piece. And that's a conversation a lot of my clients have with me when I start talking about nutrition and helping them through things. And they'll have that almost every time. It's almost the same thing. It's almost that aha moment, like, oh, you're talking about what's in the food. I'm like, yeah.
Right.
Like that's
Right.
what, like, it's not just a matter of like go eat an apple or an orange or some vegetables, or it's like, no, what's in the food, that's what matters. And so knowing those pieces and not being scared of, oh, well, this food item has this many carbs, or this, or I'm missing proteins. You mentioned amino acids, and I know protein is a huge topic nowadays.
Right.
And we just cycle through those, whether it's carbs, fats, protein, fiber. We just cycle through those as far as topics in our general population. But what it comes down to is like it is the nutrient at the cell level, right?
That's exactly right. And interestingly, what we've discovered about these polysaccharides, even though technically they are a carbohydrate,
Mhm.
but in reality, they actually function like a vitamin or a mineral. They're much more sophisticated and they have much more bioactive potential because of the way they function.
Mhm.
I think, Jerry, there's actually something, at least in these two, and of course, there are lots of other plants that have polysaccharides besides aloe vera and rice, but I think to me, there's something beyond just biochemistry with these two particular compounds. I think there's something on the physics level. I think maybe there's a resonant frequency about these two particular compounds that
Mhm.
align so elegantly with our cells. I mean, I don't have any data to prove that. That's just sort of
Right.
a little theory that I have going, but I mean, really compare if you just look at the research and again, don't take my word for it. Go to PubMed, and any of our
Mhm.
listeners can do their own literature search on PubMed, which is basically the gold standard of all scientific information in the world, and do your own literature search and look,
Mhm.
look for every, whatever commonly you think of would be an important natural compound. The only thing that I would compare relatively the same would be curcumin.
Mhm.
I mean, anything
Yeah.
else, I just think pales in comparison in terms of what these two plants provide us. And even take rice for a second. Most of the world, I think about 70 to 80% of the rice sold in the world is white rice.
Right.
So the white rice has had the rice bran stripped off of it.
Right.
So all of those people, and I eat rice nearly every day. I eat brown rice, but all of
Mhm.
the people eating white rice every day, you're not even getting the best
Right.
benefit of that plant. You've actually gotten the most processed form of it, where the most nutritious part of that rice kernel has been either thrown away or fed to livestock.
Right.
Now, how ironic is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Animals, in most cases, are actually eating the most nutritious part of rice
Yeah.
compared to the humans that, ultimately are eating the most rice. So it's
Right.
just, you're not even getting the best part of it if you're eating white rice every day.
Right.
You're just getting digestible starch, basically.
Yeah. Um, well, and that adds the piece of the processing, right? And like
Mhm.
how much we're losing from just the whether it's take it from the like it comes out of the ground or even how the ground is treated to what winds up in your grocery store or restaurant, um, that winds up in your body. Like there's plenty of research that says that we're deficient compared to where we were 100 years ago.
That's right.
But even like what you think you're getting, you may say, okay, I know I'm deficient from them, but even what you think you're getting is probably less than reality because it's been processed and stripped of so many things.
Absolutely. I mean, processing it to your point is a huge issue today. So if you're not, and I don't have a garden, I mean, I wish I did. We've
Mhm.
got a few fruit trees in our yard, but I mean, clearly we can't, eat the way we want to eat,
Right,
just living off of mangoes and avocados. But
right,
I mean, if you're not growing your own food in your own garden or farm, then you're dependent on either the grocery store, which most people are,
yeah,
or just eating out all the time. And so you really don't
right.
have a clue
Mhm.
how all of that's being treated and processed and what's being done to it. So, I mean, to me, I try to buy most of our food from the grocery store. I try to buy mostly organic. So I'm hoping that I can still put my faith in the system that
Right,
by the organic standard, it's not genetically modified and it's not been treated with pesticides or herbicides. But,
right,
it's kind of like trusting the economy, right? I mean,
yeah,
there's only so much you can do as an
right,
individual to, all the way up to that national level where things are supposed to be happening by law, by standards, by policies. And if at some point you can't trust that anymore, then maybe it is time to, start farming yourself. I mean,
right.
I can remember my day, my youth, and my mom's parents. They always had a garden, and it was a lot of fun for me to help my grandfather pick tomatoes. That guy could grow the best tomatoes you ever ate. And his corn and okra and green beans and squash and carrots and watermelon and cucumbers and on and on and on. I
Right.
mean, that guy had an amazing green thumb. And unfortunately, I've lived a life where I've never really, had a focus on having my own garden. I've lived in buildings or at least half my adult life where I didn't
Yeah.
even have a yard, let alone a garden.
Right. Right.
So yeah,
Well, and
it's
so, but that's
difficult.
where it's like it's not impossible still though, right? Because like
Right.
there's okay, how do I supplement and make sure that I'm getting the right thing? And then which of course opens up a whole nother avenue of like, okay, well, there's the supplement market's huge. How do I know I'm actually getting a benefit from this and it's not just creating expensive urine, right? Like,
That
how do I
too.
know these things are in what I need and what my wife needs could be different, right? And so
Absolutely.
like how do we find that? How do we like figure that out when we're trying to put those puzzle pieces together? Is there a good way to do that?
Well, that's that's a great question too. And obviously, most people out there are not trained to forget conducting science, but just to
Mhm.
evaluate science, like to
Right,
even read an article in a journal. How do you know, what that all that information means? So
right.
one of the things that I try to do as much as I can is talk about my research in terms that people can hopefully understand it, but also let people know that, this is my life. I
Mhm.
didn't go into the business I'm now in because I was just trying to make a buck. I actually spent nearly 20 years, and in fact, we're still publishing papers. We just published the third paper from our multiple sclerosis study a few weeks ago. So that's 7 papers combined from our Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis trials that support the creation of this product that we sell now. And so
Mhm.
what I try to help people understand is, if you don't want to buy my brand, that's one that's one thing, but
Right.
at least try to do as much due diligence and homework as you can on any company that you would consider buying their product. I mean, I think it's like any other consumer decision on some level. It's not the same as buying a car.
Right.
Clearly, spending 30 or 40 or even $100 on a dietary supplement's not the same as buying a $50,000 car. But
Right.
I think most people would try to do some homework on a car purchase. They wouldn't just drive home one day from work and pass by the Toyota dealer and say, "Oh, I'm going to run in here and buy a car today."
Right.
Like,
Right. Yeah.
I hope people don't do it that way. I know I've never
Yeah.
bought a car that way.
Right.
But I encourage people to try to find out as much information as they can about any brand or any company or any product and see if there's actually been some research done on that particular product. Like I think for me, that's one of the most important things is if you can actually determine if some research has been done on a particular product and if it makes sense to then support that company. Because there are other companies out there like mine that are doing it that way, and I applaud those people, and that is, in my opinion, one of the thresholds that consumers should look for is to find
Mhm.
out if companies are supporting research on their own products, because to me that tells you that they're putting their money where their mouth is, and they're actually spending the money to validate what it is
Right.
that they're selling.
Right. Well, and that looking at that piece of it, you know, understanding that different things do different things in the body, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, we need vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, all the different, and so how do we know, like, when it comes to something like a polysaccharide, like, there's the aloe vera plant and the rice bran, which, and you sort of explained it a little bit, but rice it's getting a really bad rap right now,
No, really,
in the nutrition world.
really is.
And it's like how do we know to, okay, well, avoid the mass media piece of it. Like, is it really that due diligence piece of doing the research? Is it finding somebody like yourself who's like putting out information and being able to validate all these things? Um, or is it just going, okay, wait a minute, if all these people did this 100 years ago and they were fine and they weren't battling all these diseases, something had to be right back then.
That's right. Well, I think in the context of rice, I mean, you just said it, mostly in Asia, of course, not
Mhm.
necessarily in the West, but look at the rates of cancer and heart disease and obesity and type 2 diabetes and some of these other things that are just killing us like wildfire. And yet,
Mhm.
in a lot of Asian countries, that hasn't occurred. And one of the staples of almost every Asian country is rice.
Right.
And they are eating white rice. I mean, they're not even
Yep.
getting the benefit of the rice bran.
Right.
They're not even getting that, and they're still eating white rice, and they're not having epidemics of all these chronic diseases like we are. So I think
Mhm.
that's one argument to sort of put these people that are constantly putting rice down
Mhm.
in their place to say, well, wait a minute, all these countries in Asia have been eating
Right.
rice as a staple for thousands of years. So why are we so sick and they're not?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just, you can't just chalk, it's like you said a moment ago about the one magic bullet or the one
Yeah.
thing. Like, people always want to reduce life or biology or physiology to like one thing, and it
Yeah.
it just never works that way.
Right.
You can't possibly, I mean, unless you get shot by a bullet, okay, that's the
Right.
one thing that killed you, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or if you get stabbed in the artery, carotid artery, yeah, that's the one thing that killed you. But
Right.
otherwise, you're dying a slow death every day because of eating a crappy diet and being
Yeah.
sedentary and smoking and drinking alcohol and taking pharmaceuticals and
Yeah.
having insomnia and not managing your stress and all these other things. Those are
Right.
the things that you put all together in this sort of profile or clinical picture to try to make sense of. But if you're just pulling out, rice as, oh, that's the killer right there. Well, really? I mean,
Yeah.
what about Dunkin' Donuts that you eat three
Right.
times a week? What about,
Yep.
Starbucks lattes you're drinking every morning? What about the
Right.
cigarettes you smoke? I mean, what about all these other things? But
Right.
you want to blame it on the rice?
Yep.
I,
No, I agree. I agree 100%. And but so what you found with specifically with Alzheimer's is that nutrition can affect the outcome, right? And
Absolutely.
like, and forget the fact that nutrition is causing it,
Right.
right? Like nutrition's causing it. And if people don't understand that, like there's a lot of research coming out on that and how poor the diet is and what's causing all the different brain dysfunctions and illnesses. Like, but with that, nutrition can then turn things back around.
It can, and we put this we put this sample of people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease, which people are which big pharma typically has no interest in those folks because they're considered too impaired, too, beyond hope, basically. But we put them on our polysaccharide based formula that included the aloe vera and the rice bran and a few other nutrients, and then we looked at what happened to them over a 12-month period, which is a pretty, for those of you who don't know too much about conducting clinical research, that's a long intervention. I
It's a
mean,
long one, yeah.
to especially for somebody like, and it's not just the patient, right? It's actually the caregiver too. So you've got to have sort of a conjoined effort of the caregiver making sure everything's done properly, and then of course giving that to the person who has this horrible disease. But we assess their cognitive function quarterly at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. And then unfortunately, we only had enough money in the budget to draw blood at baseline in 12 months. But Jerry, what we showed at 9 and 12 months was basically unlike anything, any other type of intervention that to date, even before and after our publication in 2013 has showed, and that is clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function according, to the ADAS-Cog, which is widely considered to be the gold standard for assessing cognitive function, especially in people with dementia. And that ADAS-Cog has been published in thousands of studies over, I think it was validated in the late 70s. So it's been around a long time. But there's nothing else. I mean, it's certainly not the 5 FDA-approved drugs for dementia. If you're lucky, you maybe have some delay of decline or stabilization, but then you just continue falling off the cliff. Compare that to a diet, any other dietary supplement, exercise, hyperbaric oxygen, acupuncture, red light therapy, music therapy, sound therapy. I mean, nothing else has showed what we showed. And I want people also to understand clinically and statistically significant, because there's a very important distinction there. So something can be statistically significant just because you have hundreds of subjects or assessments in a study. You could have statistical significance all day long when your numbers are large enough.
Right.
But does it have any practical or real world relevance? That's the question. In the case of the ADAS-Cog, if the score changes by 4 points or more in either direction, good or bad, that is considered to be clinically meaningful, meaning that it actually has a noticeable benefit in the person's life. So we showed clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive functioning. Again, that's unheard of. Nothing else has ever showed that in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease. Those folks were on average 79.9 years of age. I actually almost insulted a man last week. He said, wait a minute, I'm 75 because I refer to them as very old. Oh, I'm sorry about that. But he didn't look or talk at all like he was 75, but I stuck my big foot in my mouth. But I mean, 79.9, I mean, that's basically the life expectancy of Americans today. That's 78, 79, 80, somewhere in there is our life expectancy. So these were older folks that had not just dementia or Alzheimer's, but they had diabetes, depression, different forms of heart disease. So these were very old, very sick folks. And we showed that kind of an effect, Jerry, that again, has nothing else has been published to show that. That was in our first paper in 2013.
Yeah. Well, and that's the outstanding piece. Is like, okay, wow, and so that it's been 11 years, right? Like
11 years.
And nothing has come out, but yet there's been more and more and more talk about dementia and Alzheimer's. It's grown and grown and grown, both in the culture, both being talked about. There's care facilities being built all over the place. And
Right.
but yet nothing seems to be mainstream wise coming out of the pharmaceutical that's actually taking care of this and being able to say, hey, let's we're gonna fix this. Um, when statistically it appears nutrition can play a huge part in maybe not completely curing depending on where you are in the disease, phase,
Right.
but definitely impacting your quality of life for the remainder of your life.
Absolutely. Well, I would just mention a couple of things related to that. Number one, and it was true then, and it's still true today. It's the sixth leading killer of Americans,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no conventional therapy, treatment, cure, if you will. Gosh, we can't even come to a scientific consensus on what causes the disease, let
Right.
alone any type of appropriate treatment for it that can actually give something, somebody some level of return to their previous existence. So it's a
Yeah.
tragic disease that I would put up against anything else. I mean, cancer,
Mm-hmm.
HIV, anything else that's killing us, heart disease.
Yeah.
I would put it up against anything else as potentially being the worst, just because of the way the person loses his or her mind.
Right.
And then also don't forget about the caregiver. The
Right.
caregiver of the person with Alzheimer's actually suffers worse.
Mm-hmm.
His or her health is worse than any other type of caregiver.
Yeah.
So it's not just the person, it's also the primary caregiver. It kills both of those people, actually.
Right.
It's a very, very horrible disease. And maybe it's also a good point to share with your listeners that I don't want anyone to construe that I'm saying we're using nutrition to treat disease. Actually, it's a
Right.
very different paradigm. So to be FTC compliant here, just so that people understand, when you use a drug, you are altering a metabolic pathway to treat a symptom of a disease, usually with one chemical. Sometimes it's a cocktail, but
Right.
usually it's one chemical. With nutrition, we're providing the materials, the raw materials that the cells need to function properly, guided by how the genes interpret that information from those materials to
Right.
then instruct the cells how to function and then hopefully to repair, restore, and heal itself or return to homeostasis. So,
Right.
two very, very different paradigms, one that alters our physiology through pharmaceuticals and one that enables our physiology through nutrition. So
Right.
please don't anyone leave this conversation and say, well, Lewis said you could use nutrition to treat disease, because
Right.
I'm not saying that at all.
Right. Right. Um, no, and there's definitely times where you would want pharmaceutical intervention.
Right. Absolutely. I would argue the United States is the best place to be if you have trauma. Like,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
you have some sort of an accident, you're involved in a car wreck and
Mm-hmm.
you're all beaten up, you've got broken bones, you've got organ damage.
Yeah.
The US is probably the best place to be in terms of being able to stabilize someone and help that person's body then get over that acute trauma to then get back to life. But
Yeah.
beyond that, I mean, do we
Yeah.
take care of ourselves in this country? Do we actually have a healthcare system? We have a chronic disease management system,
Right.
but in
Right.
that acute setting, definitely when we have trauma, we need a drug to stabilize ourselves, then
Yeah.
absolutely, by all means.
Yep. But it's the other side of it. It's like you said, it's giving the cells what they want. It's making sure that we're providing what the body needs to continue, to live basically, like
That's
to
right.
function. And and the interesting thing, and I think you touched on this earlier, is it's the cells, whether they're a brain cell, whether they're a heart cell, whether they're a muscle cell, like they all still function off the same nutrients.
That's right.
And so it's not a matter of, you know, yes, different vitamins go and do different things and they're used in different ways, but they're still needed by all the cells.
That's right.
And so it's making sure that we're getting those things. And if it has to be in conjunction with medicine at certain times in our lives, okay, but don't forget that nutrition is out there and is trying to help you.
That's right. Well, and I hope at some point, I don't know how potentially doable or likely this is, but I hope at some point to be involved in a process developing I don't I don't know test is the right word, but maybe assay is a better word, to actually be able to demonstrate how essentially non-essential these polysaccharides are, meaning that we know that we can test for things like vitamin D, vitamin
Hmm.
B12, iron. There are certain vitamins and minerals we can test for, and we can
Yeah.
say, well, you're insufficient or you're deficient or you're low or whatever.
Yeah.
With the polysaccharides, we can't do that. There's no assay or test that I can tell somebody, well, here, go take this test and it'll tell
Hmm.
you if you're low on polysaccharides. There's no such thing. But I think
Yeah.
there is the potential, but perhaps to do that one day. If I'm not a biochemist, I'm a physiologist, but
Hmm.
I think potentially there is the opportunity to do that because of how integral these polysaccharides are to cellular functioning. And hopefully I can, at some point along the way, kind of like what I was saying about testing them on a resonant frequency level. I mean, there are lots of ideas that I would like to be able to explore as I continue down my own little path and journey in life, to be able to help people better validate, or not better validate, but validate for people
Hmm.
how essential and how necessary these polysaccharides are. Because again, I've just seen, I mean, beyond our own research that we've published over just this 20-year period of just individuals reporting to me on all sorts of different health challenges that they've had and then how they've recovered. But one of the things that, before we go on to too many other things, I'd like to just tell our listeners that among the other interesting findings that we've published so far were that in that first paper, along with the cognitive functioning finding, we also showed an improvement in overall immune system functioning according to the CD4 to CD8 ratio, which is our helper to cytotoxic cell ratio. That's not just important for people with Alzheimer's. That's important for all of us. We want that ratio to be as optimal as possible,
Hmm.
especially as we go through through
Right.
our lifespan. And then we showed a lowering of TNF alpha and VEGF, which are two proteins that are inflammatory markers that are commonly looked at in cardiovascular disease and cancer. Our paper was probably the first paper published showing the reduction of those two markers in people with Alzheimer's. And then we also showed an improvement just under 300% of CD14 cells, which are markers of adult stem cells that through other research has shown that CD14s can turn into neurons. And
Mm.
so imagine people just
Wow.
under 80 years of age on average having that adult stem cell production go up that much.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just an incredible finding as well. So there were lots of cellular physiological functioning data that we've published in addition to the cognitive functioning data that just give us a very complete picture, or as complete as possible without actually
Right.
having images of the brain,
Yeah.
showing what was happening in the blood, and then how that related to clinical or practical assessments. So it's been an enormous, I mean, literally a mountain of work that
Hmm.
we've put into this that didn't have multi-million dollar budget behind it either. I mean, we did
Yeah.
all of this thanks to the generosity of one family who heard Dr. McDaniel give a lecture, and he was talking about some of the work he had done with some people with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And the lady in the audience, she and her husband eventually decided to make a donation to research for nutrition that had to be done with Alzheimer's because they
Hmm.
had lost four family members to Alzheimer's. So
Oh, wow.
it's actually only, Jerry, through the generosity of that one family that I'm even sitting here talking to you today, because
Wow.
otherwise we wouldn't have had the money to
Yeah.
do that research.
Right.
So it's been a very interesting journey up to this point, just in terms of the connections that I've made and some of the different steps that I've taken along this process. But now I feel like I've taken it to a point after leaving academics 7 years ago, and now in business for the last few years, really trying to, like, having the opportunity to be on a show like with you
Hmm.
and other people that I've been having conversations and interviews with, and really taking this message to a whole different level of
Right.
bringing awareness about these polysaccharides and how beneficial they can be. And oh, by the way, it's not just for people with brain health issues or
Hmm.
neurodegeneration. In my
Right.
opinion, every single person, if you're living and breathing and you can swallow, every single person can benefit from these polysaccharides,
Right.
because prevention is just as important as treatment. And you're not getting these from the food. Most people don't
Right.
eat white rice or brown rice, and I don't know anybody who eats aloe vera. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
really you really can benefit from taking a product like ours because you want to prevent cancer and heart disease and diabetes and neurodegeneration in the first place.
Right. And I mean, that's the biggest piece is like the prevention piece. And how do we make sure? And so there's a couple things you touched on that sort of go together in like, but you talked about essential, non-essential, like, in which is another big hot topic when you get into start talking to people about, okay, if you can break them down from the macro level of nutrition and just talking about carbs and protein and then get into the weeds a little bit. And then they're like, oh, well, but you have to have these amino acids from this source because it's going to do
Right.
this. And these are the essential. And it's like, okay, well, you know, I get that certain processes happen because certain things are introduced, right? Um, but those sources can come from other places. Like you've got two different, the polysaccharides coming from two different places. So
That's
let's say
right.
somebody was allergic to rice for some reason, right? Okay, well, that doesn't mean they can never get it, right? Like, so
Exactly.
there's always another option out there that the body can go with, but the other piece I wanted is where you got your funding from. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people, they see the headlines and they hear like, oh, well, this is bad for you, right? Oh, rice is bad for you. Don't because the headline says something because some researcher somewhere was paid by somebody to be able to put something out that supports their product, which is on the other side of the aisle, right? And so
Exactly right.
going down that rabbit hole is necessary sometimes to say who's putting the money behind these research projects that's coming out. And so when it's somebody who's wealthy, has the money, wants to prevent the disease because they've lost people in their family, I'm a lot more inclined to go, I'll believe what comes out of this study versus something that's going on at a university that big pharma or big food is paying for to
That's
prove a
right.
point.
Absolutely. And the other thing I'd like to share with your listeners is funding is exactly the thing that drove me out of academics.
Mhm.
I mean, there were other issues too, but after we published that first paper in 2013, I mean, as you can imagine, man, I was like, I was on cloud nine. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
I was on top of the mountain. I thought,
Mhm.
wow, we are on to something that is major here. We have an opportunity to actually help people with this disease that otherwise there's nothing for. And
Right.
so I tried 2 times with NIH and 2 times with the Alzheimer's Association over about that 4-year period from 13 when we published that first paper to 17 when I left academics, end of May 17. I tried 4 separate times to get funding to extend our research. I got
Yeah.
a
Zero.
big fat
Yeah.
goose egg in response. I got nothing.
Yeah.
And so when you hear these, so-called public health experts, talking head experts about, whatever it is that their main thing is, but they maybe mention nutrition to sound good or
Right.
to sound like they're at least tipping their hat to it. I can tell you that's exactly all it is, because the
Yeah.
reality is we had documented, these results already. We were not just submitting a proposal with an idea.
Yeah.
We were submitting a proposal with data
Yeah.
and got completely shunned, like no
Right.
interest whatsoever. So that told me all I needed to know about. I was not going to waste my whatever days, months, years I had left in my life banging my head against the wall, making it bleed,
Yeah.
trying to convince these bureaucrats to give us more money to extend this line of research. I just wasn't
Mhm.
going to do it.
Yeah.
And so I just decided it took me a while because those were not the only 2 studies I had running. I had
Mhm.
lots of studies. Gosh, at one point I had like 20 students under me. I mean, I had a
Yeah.
big group of people that were helping me run all these different studies that we had going. So it took some time to sort of gradually finish all of that and
Sure.
do what I had to do to summarize studies and get things published and do what I felt like was the right thing in terms of where funders had made commitments to me, and I wanted
Mhm.
to honor my commitments. So it was
Yeah.
not like working, I don't know, as a clerk at whatever, the bank or a gas station and just saying, well, I'm out of here, like I'm
Right.
done
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything like that, but anyway, it basically, it showed to me that if you're not doing pharmacology or genetics, something that these organizations can do a licensing deal with either big
Mhm.
pharma or a biotech company, then
Right.
nutrition is just something that sounds good, but it's not going to happen. In fact, even another little anecdote, this was before I actually, it was in a different context. The director of the national, I forget the acronym has changed a little bit,
Mhm.
but it's the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. It's that one branch of
Mhm. Yeah.
NIH. And they do some dietary supplement research out of there. The director at that time, and I'm trying to remember which year this was. This was a lady. I don't remember her name, but she was the director. She was invited down to the University of Miami to meet with different people, spend all day with us.
Yeah.
And she point blank told me that she would not support any additional funding for dietary supplement research because they had put X number of dollars into this study on vitamin E and it showed nothing. I mean, you could
Wow.
see like this lady was not hiding her disgust,
Yeah.
and, her body language was very clear. Like,
Yeah.
she absolutely would not fund any additional dietary supplement research based on this one vitamin E study that showed nothing. And so, for these
Mhm.
people, it's all about, well, we funded this and what did it show? If it didn't
Right.
show anything, and then to their mind, it's a waste of money, basically.
Right. Right.
But she took that one study and basically made it her blanket approach or opinion to the entire industry. Like,
Yeah.
no, that's it for me. Like, as long as I'm director of this division, no funding is going out of here for dietary supplements.
Right.
If you want to do yoga or Tai Chi or, some mind body woo woo kind of thing, okay, we'll consider it. But
Yeah.
dietary supplements, forget it.
Yeah.
And that was
Wow.
another thing that was very like, just, like raw in my
Mhm.
face. Like, no, no, forget you, dude. Like, you're going down
Right.
the wrong path. We're
Yeah.
not interested in your path.
Right. Well, and like you said, because there's very little if you come out and tell people just go eat this, like I mean it helps the farmers for that product or item, but other than that, like yeah, you can't there's there's no I'm going to put this in a package and sell it and you're going to have to keep coming to get it every 30 days because otherwise your blood's going to give you this test result that's going to show that you're having all these issues.
Right.
And it's not to be conspiracy theory, but it's reality, and that big food and big pharma are working together to do things to make
That's
sure that
right.
both of them continue on. Um,
That's
and
exactly right.
and it's a sad state, but it's where we are. And so educating yourself to know, like, okay, wait, it, I may not have an option, right? Financially, I may not have an option to go get organic food or do all those things to make sure that it's okay. So what can I do is make sure that I'm getting the other pieces to the puzzle. So hopefully I'm I'm flooding my system, if you will, with the good stuff so it'll keep the bad stuff from sticking.
That's
Yet,
exactly right. And, I think vitamin D is a good example of that. 70% of Americans are now either insufficient or deficient
mhm,
in their vitamin D status. What's optimal is debatable. Some people
sure,
say it's 60 to 80. Other people say it should be over 100. That's, not really very well established yet, but at least getting it up over, like the 50 mark,
yeah,
I would say in most instances is where you should be. I know mine's usually around 60. I usually test it once a year, but
mhm,
it's if you're not getting it in the sun every day, if you live in Minnesota or North Dakota or Montana, somewhere way north where maybe you
right,
don't get as much sun, or even when you get some sun, it's not very intense. So if you're not like us living in the southern latitudes, then definitely take your vitamin D3 every day. I mean, it's
right,
relatively inexpensive,
yeah,
or take your vitamin D fortified cereals or almond milk or whatever. I mean, try to get your vitamin D level up because we know now it's interactive with over 4,500 of our genes out of
right,
whatever we have, 35, 40,000, it's kind of a loose number,
Yeah.
but it's only going to continue growing in its importance and what it means to us in terms of our health. I mean, we used to think of vitamin D just for bones, but now we
Right.
know it's literally for every major organ system. So
Yeah.
really, unless you're destitute, number one, go out in the sun every day for 10, 15, 20 minutes. And if you can't do that, then take your supplement every day, because it's just way too important not to stay on top of that vitamin D status.
Yep. Well, and it's learning those pieces of the puzzle and not being not being so caught up in carbs in general, protein in general, but getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's going on inside. And
That's right.
it's like, you and it's a multi-layered system, right? Your car can
Exactly.
have a flat tire, you can fill the gas tank up and be like, okay, well, I got plenty of gas. Why am I not going anywhere?
That's right.
Right? Or at least not fast,
That's
right?
right.
It's like there's
And
other pieces to the puzzle we got to make sure that we're looking at, and a lot of those, like you said, can be looked at in a blood test on a yearly basis
that's
to
right.
see where we are.
And
And
oh,
so
by the
having
way,
that baseline.
make sure you take your D3 with K2, because they
Mhm.
both are very important to be taken together. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, you're right. You have all of these different indicators that are relatively easily assessed. They're usually not a lot of money. I mean, if you do that once
yeah,
a year, for most people, it shouldn't be that big of a financial burden, but it's just
right,
so important to track your data periodically and see where you are. And the other thing is, you don't need a blood test to tell you, do you feel well? Like,
right,
do you get out of bed? Do you feel refreshed? Do you have energy for the day? Can you focus? Are you sharp? I mean, do you feel like you're not forgetful or
Mhm.
absent-minded? There are a lot of different sort of subjective questions that we can ask ourselves. And then that is, to me, very important as well. That type of information is important to say, okay, well, if I'm not feeling well, then now why? Like,
Yeah,
why do I not have energy? Why am I fatigued all the time? Why am I not
right,
sleeping well? These are the kinds of questions that you then need to start maybe peeling the onions layers back a bit to get down into the nitty gritty of what's going on, and then what can you do about it.
right. Um, yeah, one of the things that I remember hearing about Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, the brain issues that typically show up later in life is that now they're starting to look at it in, like, you can see before those true symptoms show up, like loss of memory and things that go along with those, but other things happening in your body as early as 40 years before can go, oh, well, if you have this, you're on that track already, right? If you don't
That's
change your
right.
lifestyle, don't change your nutrition, don't change. And so that just goes to show that it's not something that's like, oh, wait, I'm going to wait until I can't remember where my keys are to start taking this polysaccharide. Like it's too important on the
Absolutely.
preventative side to start early.
Well, and I would say one of the biggest ones is inflammation. I mean,
Mhm.
C-reactive protein is sort of a generic marker of inflammation, but if if you don't currently have like the flu or some infection or something, get it tested when you're feeling okay, like you
Yeah,
don't have any acute issue. And then that's a very important marker to look at for chronic inflammation. It's cheap. It shouldn't cost you more than 20 or 30 bucks at the most.
yeah,
And then monitor that periodically, because as we know, there are two types of inflammation: the acute type that we need when we have any type of a trauma. We need inflammation at that
yeah,
point to heal and actually live. But then the chronic type, that's really the bad type, where it's dysregulated and it's constantly ongoing, and our body is the immune system essentially is not functioning as it should. And that, to your point, is what sets us up for later life of having
mhm,
cancer or neurodegeneration or heart disease or diabetes or all these other things that are killing us. So
yeah,
we definitely want to get that chronic long-term inflammation under control. And in my opinion, the best way that we do that is through nutrition.
yeah,
And then of course, exercise and all the other
right,
things. But
right,
absolutely. I mean, we need to get a handle on these kinds of things to make sure that we don't set ourselves up, especially for any of your listeners who are in their 20s or 30s. And, at that point, most people probably still feel pretty invincible. They don't have
right.
any, ongoing
Yeah,
daily aches and pains. And They
Yeah.
still feel like they can, go jump through hoops any time of the day and not have any issues. But hey, guess
Yeah.
what? To your point, you can start, introducing consequences later on in your life that you could prevent today if you do it properly, as opposed to doing it improperly, where now you're setting yourself up for the bad things.
Right. Yep. Exactly. So I want to be respectful of your time, and but give you an opportunity to let people know how can they connect with you, how can they follow you, or what your social media platforms that you're on, and learn more about the products and research that you've got.
Well, thank you for that, Jerry. So after leaving academics, I went into business, as I mentioned, in the dietary supplement world. I've started a few brands and I've gone through some punches in the gut
Yeah,
and
I'm sure.
some failures there, but now I feel like I'm on the right track. So my company is called Dr. Lewis Nutrition. The best source of information in terms of the most comprehensive information about our research and all that we've done is at drlewisnutrition.com. That's
Okay.
dr no period Lewis Lewis nutrition.com. You can find us on all the typical social media under that same handle, Dr. Lewis Nutrition.
Okay.
And then our flagship product is called Daily Brain Care that we spent again nearly 20 years researching, and I'm very proud of that product. It's kind of like my inanimate baby, if you will.
Yeah.
And I've been on that formula for at least a decade now. I've had my mother on it mom's probably been on it 12, 13 years. My wife started taking it 5 years ago when she was pregnant. When she turned 6 months of age and introducing solid food to her, I started giving it to her. She's 4
Mhm.
now.
Nice.
And so I mentioned those anecdotes for a couple of reasons. One, because not only am I putting my own name on my own brand, if that
Mhm.
tells anybody that, I'm very confident in what I'm doing,
Yeah.
but also because I'd be a hypocrite if I was telling people to take a product that I didn't take
Right.
and give it to my own family for ourselves. So again, in my opinion, these polysaccharides are just, obviously oxygen is our first nutrient, and then
Sure.
we need water after that and vitamins and minerals. But beyond that, I mean, these polysaccharides, I just put them up against anything. And again, we want to prevent bad things from happening to us in the
Mhm.
first place. So why not take advantage of all this information about how beneficial these polysaccharides are? But you can go to our website. We have an email address there, phone number. I'm happy to, if anyone has any questions about the research, the products, anything that I do, I'm more than happy to answer questions to help people. And again, I'm just here. I'm like you, Jerry. I'm just here to help people get healthy, and
Right.
primarily through the power of nutrition,
Yeah.
which I think is the most important thing.
Yeah.
But I have a unique message about these polysaccharides that most people don't have any clue about. You'd
Right.
probably never really hear about it from many other people besides myself. But
Yeah.
they're just so dynamic. And I've just, again, in my 20 years of working with these things now, I've just seen so many incredible responses. So I'm happy. And I would encourage any of your listeners to give them a try and see what they do for them.
Awesome. Well, and one thing I wanted to note too is that you mentioned that your daughter's on them, and so it's
Yes,
when it comes to nutrition, it's not something that you necessarily you usually don't have to worry about. If you're under 18, you can't do this, or
that's right.
it, or
Or a
you have to.
pregnant woman.
Right. It's like, okay, this is a natural substance. It's naturally not only naturally absorbed and taken care of in your body, and knows what to do with it, which some of the pharmaceuticals and chemicals that we have, like our body, it creates alerts to them because it's such a foreign substance.
That's right.
It may still work in its function to heal you from an acute issue, but it's still something that's chemically foreign to the body.
That's
Um,
exactly right. And our
it's like,
product is totally natural, plant-based, nothing synthetic in it,
yeah,
no excipients. I mean, it's 100% natural. And
that's awesome.
so yes, it's been an honor to be here with you today. I appreciate the
Yep,
time. I'm happy to come back anytime again if you like.
awesome.
And
Well, I want to applaud you for the work that you're doing, in the Alzheimer's world, and I know it's something that's touched everybody. Like
that's
it's
right.
touched everybody. Somebody knows somebody, whether it's a family member or a close friend, that's dealt with it or is dealing with it. And so, I want to applaud you tackling that. And I also applaud you for going up against the systems that you're going up against in the business side of it to make sure that this stuff is out there as an option for people that want something that's different from the standard pharmaceutical side of things.
I appreciate the kind words. Yes, it's been a fight, let me tell you.
Yeah, I bet.
And I'll continue doing it till my last breath because I feel so compelled with what I do, but I appreciate the kind words.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for having you on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for checking out the Confidence Through Health podcast. Please subscribe, post a review, share this episode with those you love who need a little extra help with their health journey. Visit allinhealthandwellness.com to learn more about the coaching programs that I provide. All episodes are produced by the Social Media Cowboys, your source for all online marketing needs. Go to socialmediacowboys.com for more information.